Welcome to Orthopod, a podcast about the people of orthopedics and their stories. We understand that we all play many roles in our careers and lives, and it is these very stories that ultimately inform our successes and failures. Hi folks, it's Mo Bendari from Orthopod, and we have another excellent, amazing guest today, a very, very good friend of mine, and it's been a long time having Dr. Asheesh Bedi, who currently is Professor of Orthopedic Surgery, Sports Medicine, and Shoulder Surgery at the University of Michigan. He's team physician for U-Michigan, he's head physician for the Detroit Lions, and he's a consultant to the NFL and NHL Players Association. It goes on and on and on, but I'm going to keep it fairly short. How are you, Asheesh?
I'm great, Mo. Thanks so much for having me. It's fun to come and finally get back together with you and visit McMaster.
It's been, how long has it been since we last connected? Probably 5 years now.
I think it's probably been 5 years.
But we saw each other, I think we were together at a couple of meetings. We were at the Codman Shoulder Association.
That's right. That's right. We did that together, and I think probably passing each other in brief moments in the hallway at one of the orthopedic meetings here or there.
They were always connected. Yeah. But this is about you today. Yeah. So what's on your mind?
Well, first and foremost, I really am excited to be here. Getting together back with you kind of at this phase of my life a little bit has been something I've been looking forward to. If I was to say what's most on my mind, Mo, I'm 39, about to hit the big 4-0 this year.
We could talk for hours on the big 4-0.
And I can't explain maybe what starts to happen. Maybe it's my own orthopedic midlife crisis, but I'm sort of at this phase where I'm thinking a little bit about what's the next 20 years of my life going to be like. And, you spend the first 10, I feel like, of your career in practice trying to establish yourself as a surgeon, establish yourself with clinical skills that people respect, build some academic reputation, a research program, and hopefully have some reputation as for all the skills that we spend years of our life building. And then I think you get maybe to this phase and wonder, is the next 20 years more of that? Or do you try to acquire new skill sets? Is it being a leader or chair like you? Is it contributing to evidence-based medicine? Probably not nearly in the way that you have, but maybe even a sliver of that for me would be an accomplishment. And then also balance. My kids are getting older, yep. And you spend more and more time at the office, more and more time in the OR to chase those dreams, and then you worry a little bit that you're chasing one thing at the potential costly expense of another. So I just told you about things that we could talk about for a century, I guess.
Okay. So I'll tell you something. So I just turned 50 this year. So I'm a little bit more than a decade ahead of you. So I went through what you went through, or you're going through, and I think it's actually quite normal. I think it's almost, at the time I thought it was almost pathologized as, there's something going to change. It's actually quite natural to go through a period of your life. I think you're going through it to some degree, and start saying, okay, what got me here is more exactly it is more of the same going to get me to where I want to go. And I would put forth that one thing I think anyone who knows you who's going to watch this is going to say, you are extremely humble for all the things that you've accomplished. I would say in the eyes of many, if not most, who look at what you've done for orthopedics, globally, you have reached pretty well the majority of every single, quote, milestone goal that many would aspire to. Yet, you come here saying, what do I do? So that's an interesting point. You've thought about it to some degree. So where are you with all this? I mean, what is next?
Well, it's first of all, it's kind of, I don't necessarily feel that way. I think you wake up every day in the morning, and I try to remind myself, I'm sure you do the same, about how, I think I heard it once at a meeting. This is actually from Jimmy Andrews, one of the famed sports surgeons in our world. He said, if you're talking a lot about what you did yesterday, you're not doing very much today. So I stole that from, I think, his wife. But I try to remind myself of that a little bit, that there's always something to contribute. But maybe to answer your question of how do I do this, I think some of it is as you get into these different positions, you start to realize that we're heading a certain direction, and does that match with what you want? So in my world, currently is the next accomplishment or phase, for example, leading a department and being a chair. Is it trying to lead a health system? Is it not going that direction and potentially getting an MBA and thinking about the business aspects of healthcare, which are so critical? But recognizing that all of the things that it takes to be effective in those roles may in fact be very different than the skills I have.
So this is interesting. So I have spent this last year, and I think I've talked about it a lot, which is this concept of 80-20, which is, I used to think that, doing more of the same was going to get me better. So, for my analogy, you write some papers, you write more papers. You do research, you do more research. If you're gonna get involved in administration, you take on multiple administrative jobs, and by doing all that, you will rise. And for all intents and purposes, you will get to a point. But when I've started reading a lot now about individuals who have had these really just breakthrough moments in their careers, and you read about them, and they're quite the opposite. They're the ones who dabbled in multiple different things, and it got me asking one question. I'm going to ask you the question. It sounds the classic cliche, but 20% of the things in our life generally give us 80% of the joy, if you use that rule. So when I look back at my own 20%, I've categorized that. What's that 20% for you? And it's totally reasonable if it's just, about operating, but I presume it's more than just that gives you true joy. When you figure that out, you start your path.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think there's many of the things that we do, as you said, and then the smaller percentage of things you do that gratify you the most. And admittedly, it changes, it evolves. I think in my first 5 years, it was feeling like your fracture reductions or your cases looked as elegant as your mentors, and you were feeling like you were hitting your stride.
Right.
Now, I would say for me, Mo, it's when you make a finding or write a paper or have an impact that's more translational than just for that patient. It's bigger than just that surgery. It's an impact that changed care for all your colleagues, not just you. I still love the one-on-one interaction with the patient. I don't think I could distance myself, at least at 40, from clinical medicine, but I think at times the amount of commitment and dedication it takes to nothing but clinical care, patient care, can at times impede you from taking the time to dedicate to the thought process it takes for the bigger discoveries, the bigger moments.
So those moments that you've had, and can you just articulate one of them? One of them where you say, you know what, I felt really good when I had that experience, and I want to find ways to have that experience more often. What was that experience, as an example?
I'll start. Probably the first example for me, when I was a fellow at Special Surgery in New York, I was admittedly a research and clinical fellow. So I, at the time, felt like maybe I was the held back student who was doing a penalty lap of an additional year. And at the time it feels like you're...
It was 5 years for me.
Yeah, well, so I can tell you you've done more than 50 times my productivity in 5.
I know the feeling.
So, at the time you wonder, is this an investment worthwhile? And then my first maybe epiphany in this was when you have a research study. At that time, it was primarily in the area of biology and augmenting healing, a big area in orthopedics today, which is it not really going to be the newer plate or the newer anchor or the newer screw? Is it really about changing the biology and the environment?
Right.
And having some studies that were specifically in that area around modulating that activity. And then, going across the country in the next year or two of my early practice and hearing other surgeons say, oh, hey, we saw your work and read our paper, and we changed what we do postoperatively as a result of that paper. Or we saw your work, and as a result of that, we've all done this, and we've seen significant improved results. Thank you for that. And that was my first realization that there was an ability, even though at the time of doing that work you felt like maybe wasn't as impactful as it could be, the impact of that for all of those in every community that was doing that kind of work and recognizing that. And then since that time, maybe realizing that in order to do that, it requires a team, but it requires not just dabbling in it, like you said. It requires a conscious effort to commit and dedicate to it, much the way that when you're in the OR, you're focused on that patient the incision to close. Mm-hmm. The same way that you can't sort of be a hobby researcher or hobby administrator or hobby chair from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. when I fall asleep.
Right. So. Well, it's the paradox I've always taught about, and I've had a chance to speak about this a little bit, which is if you talk to a trainee or a resident or early career faculty, they have no doubt in their mind that what they want to do when it comes to the management of patients and healthcare, and they will say, I will do a fellowship, I'm going to get expertise. I may spend many, many years getting that expertise. And then I'll just come back to my program, and my department chair will say, okay, we need you to do some clinical research. Okay, sure, no problem. And what gives any of us the really the ability, but we do it. And most of us, when you look at individuals, they do a remarkable job considering truly the competitive landscape for research. The only thing that differentiates getting what we would say and what you might argue as, the big funding or the large scale funding or some of the more complex trials is just time. Just time working away, working with people and focusing on that at the expense of something else, right?
Right, absolutely.
And that's kind of where I think.
I want to ask you a question, Mo, if you don't mind. One of the things as I've tried to be introspective and look at myself is we tend to, it's human nature, but certainly I think surgical disciplines in particular, once we finally conquer or feel like we've hit our stride and have comfort in a given skill set. For me, that may be as a sports surgeon, or for you as a traumatologist, where you can get that acetabular fracture looking well and that and looking good, and that all the challenges of that, while there might be subtle improvements in your efficiencies, you understand that puzzle.
Right.
To then take a leap entirely away from that, which is our comfort zone, and say, now I'm going to take on the next thing. There's a risk of failure, right? There's a risk that I may be a really, really adept and respected surgeon, but I may be a terrible chair. I may not be as effective a multi-center researcher, but you have lived that, done that, and been incredibly successful in all these other venues. How did you convince yourself at whatever age it was, 35, 40, 45, that you were going to now take an entire transition to a different skill?
Yeah. So two things. One is you don't necessarily know you're in that moment. You just walk through those doors that are open for you. So being at McMaster, a lot of doors were open. A lot of people around me supported those doors to be open. And I didn't really have the insight truly to understand just where it was going. I just had the joy. So it gets back, I'm being truly honest, it gets back to, if you figure out something that you say, I really like this, like I like it a lot. I'm not really that good at it, but I really like it. If you like something enough, and I'll even use the passion word, but it's so cliched, but you like it, you will toil away at it and you'll try to get better, and small things in something you feel you're not that great at seem even bigger to you, right? Massive, massive triumphs for you. But to get to your point, I just got very, very comfortable with failing, and a lot of it. And it's not as easy to fail when you're in an operating room, because failure there is, there's major, major consequences to some other human being. But if it's failures, the consequences are, to me, you write a paper, rejection, hypotheses fail all the time in research. I'll try a bunch of new things, and I'll actively go out and so I've been writing about it a lot, and more creative writing than it is actual scientific writing, which is storytelling, right? And you better than anyone know, because we've worked together. You know that if you can tell a story about a problem, or you can get people engaged, and then they get excited because they see that they're part of that story. Well, on a larger level, you are your story. So what story are you hoping to tell? When someone talks about you, what story do you want them to tell about you? And one thing is that, hey, he tries a bunch of stuff. He will never say no, to a point, unless it's really dangerous. But you'll try a bunch of things, and I'll get areas where failure for me teaches me something. And the thing I've learned is, and the reason, you always say, oh, you're always out, you're riding your bike or trying to do something, it's really quite simple in that I'm trying to push it to a point where I'll get to a point where it's beyond a stretch, and I'm going to say, okay, that's my limit at what that is, but I've learned from that. And when you're surrounded by individuals who are very different than you, so the mountain biking culture is very different than the culture you and I were, right? Sure. Awesome. And in many ways, just an amazing group of people. If you were to go kayaking, the group of people who do that, or you were to go hiking, these are all activities, but painting, I just took up painting. These are a bunch of things that I've been doing simply to interact with people from a different mindset, and actually, quite frankly, be put in a position where I'm the student. Like, I can't imagine there's that many times when you're working that you feel like a student. You may internalize it, but no one around you, Asheesh, ever says, oh, he's the student. You're the mentor, you're always the mentor, you're the leader, and people look to you for that. It's kind of nice to have almost no expectations. Sure. So I put myself in situations where there's no expectations. Yeah, but Mo can only go up in estimation.
But it's also admirable, because if I was also being honest, I think many surgeons and our personalities and our culture, we tend to avoid the environments where we're not the authority, right? Where we're not seen as the know-it-all. And I am. You just made a statement, and I think you told me this maybe 5 years ago, but the art of storytelling to us, you'd say, well, why do we need that skill set? And I think I really took it to heart 5 years ago that the art of storytelling is very much similar to the art of grant writing. And if you can convince someone of a well-stated, succinct purpose and methodology and conclusion, it's not that dissimilar. So I know all these areas that you're focusing on and evolving passions because I follow them on social media, and I'm envious. I can't draw like you. I can't watercolor like you. I can't be a researcher like you.
Can I say something? On this one point. So you're looking for a different way to get out, like to change the way your situation in a way, right? You're thinking through different ways, and you want to find a different perspective. What can you do, or what do you like to do, or what did you like to do, or what would you like to do that was uniquely something very different than your day-to-day work? What is that? Like, just articulate that for me so I understand it. Even if you never tried it. Oh, I wouldn't mind trying this. I haven't tried it, but if I were going to do anything, I would learn that. What is that?
I think it's a great question. For me, I started as really an engineer. So for me, my even path to orthopedics, I'd love to tell you, I think anyone who can see visually on the podcast, I don't look the part of a football player, or I don't remotely look anything that looks the part of an athlete, unless maybe the game is chess or something. But my passion was more that I was always a bit inclined towards solving the puzzle, the challenge, the design of something, and then evolving technology toward that direction. And for me, biomedical engineering and biophysics was where that started, and then it had a natural link to orthopedics. Yeah. And it's really been that since. And if I were to tell you where I feel like I'm the most interested, and it's not in the medical world, it's the mechanical, design, apply, innovate some technology that could be in a totally different realm. It could be in the garage. It could be in a new tool or technology that has something to do with a field independent of medicine, but that problem solving.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you this point that you just raised. So you like biomedical engineering, and that's something that you think is a departure from your work, and it's obviously a very creative. To create is just that. You've got to have a mindset of being creative. How do you get ideas? And again, like if you're thinking of designing something, and let's say that part of your time away is going to be, I'm going to spend some time thinking about some of these other issues that I used to you quite liked. How do you get ideas? What do you do? And let me give you the example of, you've heard probably that Steve Jobs used to do walking meetings and, get out. I tend to ride. I quite like it because you're alone and you have your own period where ideas really do come. Where do they come for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, in my current life, Mo, as weird as it sounds, when all the things in an operation through a day go well, I don't necessarily feel like I learned that much. Right. You kind of have the resident or fellow with you, and they feel like, oh, look, everything went great. And I always tell them, you won't like the day when everything went wrong, but you'll learn the most from it. Yeah, right. And so for me, where it always starts is I'm doing something or some case, and I feel there's steps where, despite being 10 years into this and doing these things in the hundreds, something about that step doesn't feel like it's elegant. It doesn't feel like it's reproducible. It feels like we get it done, but there must be a better way. Yeah. Or the worst case where you do everything right, and 6 months or a year later, you're back in that patient's shoulder, knee, hip, elbow, and you say, well, even though we did it right, what I'm looking at down below didn't heal well, didn't end up where we wanted it to be. And it's a revision. And so it usually starts for me there. And then I'll try to take some time, and frankly, sometimes it's sketches, it's models. I'll go and find a couple of the Sawbones models on the back table. I'll take some of the implants that get wasted in the operating room, and I'll think about things I could do to modify them, adjust them, make some tools, even sort of poor man's tools, and have them machined up to say, well, I wonder if we did that, or I wonder if we did this, or I'll think to some other areas where we've tried to do something in a different space. I'll talk to students at our university who say, well, we're getting 3D images of these things all the time, not in medicine, but we can take 5 different views with the camera and make a 3D model out of it. and realize, well, if we did that with arthroscopy in this type of surgery, would that be useful to have that feedback in real time? So some of it is, as you said, the cross-pollination of the environment at the university where someone in a totally different field gives me some insights. But for me, it's the frustration or challenge of the OR and then taking it back to the table and kind of becoming an engineer again.
Oh, yeah.
And not worrying about all the things that make it hard to do that in the human body, but first start by saying, can you do it at all? And then can we reverse engineer it to get there to put it back into the case?
Do you, so all this is happening in your mind, and you obviously have an organized way of thinking through it. Have you ever journaled or written it down, diary, sketched out ideas? Do you keep a regular place where you keep your ideas and then you kind of look back at them, or how do you track all this?
Yeah, it's an evolution. I think to your point, Mo, many times you have that question, and if you don't do what you just said, you don't realize that you did nothing with that idea until the next time you struggle with it in the OR.
Yes.
Or the next time you see that product or that device or that technique being used and you say, oh, well, somebody else thought of it too, and maybe it wasn't just unique to me. So I try to log that, and then the challenge is maybe what I spoke to you about a little earlier is finding the time and the commitment and the focus to not dabble in that. That it's not, let me revisit that at 11 at night, that I actually want to commit some real time, energy, build a team around it, take a little bit of a risk with it. Yeah. Many of these ideas, probably the vast majority of them, probably don't change our care in the OR. Yeah. But the fun of it would be if you could.
I'm positive I said this to you when we met many years ago, because it's been on it's one of the things I've always thought is in interacting with myself and a bunch of other folks that I know have had the same challenges with shifting, like really big shifts, has been the biggest impediment to having a great life is having a good life, because you never want to risk giving up the good life. When you think, my life's okay, I don't want to mess with this. Yeah, I have all kinds of issues, but when I think about giving that up, suddenly I can't give that up. I don't want to give it up. So if you have to give up something, truly, what would you give up to make room for this? Because you can't just keep adding room. I presume your day is pretty well full.
Yeah.
Right? Your plate's full. There's got to be noise in that day. Has to be. And so how do you figure it out? And that gets back to the 20%. What do I love doing? And when I did it, it just became easier to do it. Right? And you realize it's actually doable, and you become more efficient in things. So I'm curious.
I think for me, it's a great question, Mo, and probably the area that I've struggled the most with, which is there's several things that I think keep us doing what we're doing. Some are driven by ego. This is hard to say as a sports surgeon, but I think the other sports surgeons listening may hear this. I love the skills of being a team physician. I love Saturday football games and Sunday football games. You feel like part of a team you would otherwise never belong to, at least with my physical attributes. You're somehow part of that environment.
I'm telling you, you're too humble. I could see you. I could see you playing any sport you want.
I don't even think I could make a long snap run at our clubs, but I do enjoy that environment and atmosphere. But admittedly, I think there's an element of every sports surgeon in an introspective moment would say there's an element of ego to that.
Sure.
That you've arrived and you're caring for that level of athlete. And there's also some enjoyment in caring for them and seeing them get back on the field. I think the clinical volume is fun, particularly when you build a reputation that people seek your care out and you don't want to part with that volume as you've spent so many years investing to build a destination practice. But if I was picking, I think it would be doing less volume of that surgery and allowing others, like you have done, mentor them, allow them to mature and assume some of that work, so that you protect some time for the bigger challenges.
Right.
And I remember when I met you, several years ago, but particularly impactful for me was when you were our Grand Rounds professor at Michigan.
I remember that.
And made some statements about, research. Yeah. And I certainly have written my fair share of papers, but I would also tell you, I doubt that on one hand, some of the papers I could name that have had remotely the impact that some of yours have. And I think that speaks to that the easy journey isn't always the best one. One of the things that is true, I think, in every aspect of what we do. In the OR, sometimes it's easier to get done by doing A instead of B. In research, it's easier to write a case series than it is to do an RCT. It's easy to collect 20 patients versus 200,000. Right. But I remember seeing your work at that time. I think you were doing a study looking at reamed versus unreamed nailing.
That was many times. Yeah, that was the sprint trial.
Yeah, sprint trial. And I think you also had done some amazing work looking at irrigation and debridement for open fractures. That's right. And then I saw you click through slides where you had recruitments from China and recruitments from Delhi.
Right.
And the amount of work it takes to get data in the thousands and hundreds of thousands, but that's the level of work and investment it needs to answer a question.
Well, that's the point, right? The point, and I think you said it clearly, is if you're going to take it on, there's the big fear. It really is a fear of failing at saying, I'm going to step out of my comfort zone to do something. But I always say, you're probably more likely in a stretch experience, someone like yourself, than you are in a complete, what I would say, high risk situation. Stretch to me is you just haven't done it, but you have the skills and the capability and all the prior, everything you've done prior is preparing you to do what you'd like to do. The only thing missing, quite frankly, is your dedication and time on that particular project. And quite frankly, the dedication and time only comes if there's an internal desire that this is an unmet need, that you want to do it. It's just something that you have to do. And generally, when you do something like that, everything else follows. Again, everyone says, oh, well, I want to make sure that I'm safe. I want to make sure all these things are in place because I'll do it once I get my big grant. Well, you won't get your big grant unless you take some risk, right? So everything's just hard. Right. But generally speaking, I always say to folks, if you really, really, really feel that you need to be doing this, you need to start doing it. And just start doing it, and you will realize that things will open up for you. It seems like doors closing everywhere in the first year. A few more open up, and now all you seem to walk through is open doors, but you don't realize that they're being opened for you by all the contacts, all the people around you, right? Sure. And I think that happens in every way. So that's how I sort of have just kind of, conceptualize, how this goes, and I've become less fearful. Someone says to me, what's your 5-year plan? I say, I don't know. I'm worried about I'm worried about today, I'm worried about tomorrow, I'm worried about this week. Right. And if I continue to worry about today, tomorrow, and this week, and I do really, really good by this week, the future is going to be great.
Right.
And that's the hardest thing, is because I used to spend all my time thinking about what's going to happen when I'm 45, what's going to happen when I'm 50. And you get to 50 and you realize, it's okay. Things worked out. They work out. You know how it is.
You're paralyzed by the need for security in that longer term future that prevents you from living today and having what you wanted 10 years from now.
Okay, so I'm going to get it out of you somehow. There's got to be something that is a bucket list thing that you want to. You're in sports. You're in all these things. There's got to be some sort of adrenaline adventure thing you've wanted to do and said, someday. What is that? It's gotta be. I'm going to get it out of you. It's got to be.
It's everything I've seen on your Instagram. It is everything I've seen you do in the past.
Okay, so we have to do it. We're going to set it up. Okay, so this is it. We're going to set it up.
I will say, one of the things that I see that you do, and I think we're probably both guilty of this, and you made some, I think, deliberate and transformative changes. We fly across the country, across the world for meetings, and I always laugh with my colleagues at work that I could have been in Flint, Michigan or Paris, France, but oftentimes the way I take that trip, I wouldn't know the difference. And the reason is you go to the meeting and you do the work and you don't live it, you don't experience it, you don't take a moment to understand it. You said it best when you sometimes are having walking meetings, or you're kayaking or you're biking, and there is still work going on and creativity that's occurring, but we tend to box ourselves in that's not the workplace.
So I would say pretty well from 30 to 40, I had traveled the world and seen nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
That's where I am.
Right. No. Isn't that psychology? Like where you're in multiple hotels, you just don't go out. The only thing I've done personally from a switch is I won't extend a trip and I won't go earlier because I want to be home. I want to be home with family. Right. That's my priority.
Right.
But I'm sure you're in the same boat where there are trips where you have days in between where you've got an afternoon off. I would normally just go back, check my emails, and get caught up in the email rut that is work. Fine, I did that for many years. But now what I would do is I would organize something. And what I did is I'd find someone local. So you'd find someone local who knows it. You're always going to be surrounded by individuals who are going to be, when you go to a place where you know people and you ask them, say, hey, is there anything, that you would recommend we could do for an afternoon? And they'll say, I can get an afternoon with you, Dr. Bedi? Yeah, I'll go. And it would be a trainee or a resident. I got to meet so many amazing residents and trainees and faculty, and I got to learn from them a different way. And I kept many of those relationships to this day. Yeah. And I can tell you, they only happened after 40. They didn't, before 40, I was seeing lots of people. I just wasn't able to connect on the way I can now.
Sure.
Simply from, hey, do you want to go for a walk? Hey, do you want to go just take a local food place someplace. Need not be anything but just get out. I've done that, and I can tell you, if you're going to take one change, that's an easy change to make, and it won't impact your time away because you're away anyway.
It's a great point. We all find this. I'm sure you feel the same way. Where in my current day, sometimes I love my children, and as soon as they go to bed, I'm itching to know that that's when I'll open up the computer and catch up on emails, or you get on the plane and everyone else turns on a movie and you open up the laptop, and that's a little bit the way we're built.
Yes.
One thing I wanted to speak to that you said that was really critical and where you've been very impactful on me. I haven't been remotely as effective as you, but to the points of things that you said I want to change in the next 15 or 20 years anyway, is this concept a bit of legacy. And I can say this with great sincerity. I've had the pleasure of training, as you know, some of the graduates from this program that have come to us for fellowship. I have had co-fellows and co-trainees with me who are now back on your staff. I have gone across the country to different places, and the tree and legacy that you have created, not just within traumatology, but within orthopedics and beyond, is really worth noting, and it's something I want to learn from. I do think in our world, evidence-based medicine is synonymous with you, and you've created a culture where across any orthopedic department, if someone has learned the methodology, the technique, the passion, the way to ask those study questions, there's a tree back to you. I think the faculty that I see who come back here have an expectation, whether it's just cultural, whether it's the feeling that they don't want to be perceived as the lagging fellow or the lagging faculty. There's an environment of excellence that everybody contributes that way, and everybody's held to that standard. And so I think when you really look at it, for me, 20 years from now, there'll be somebody who'll put in an ACL probably better than I will. Probably somebody doing it now.
Oh.
But I know that 20 years from now, you'll have hundreds of people out there that are touched, as you said, when you travel the world. I see it in your notes, and I see it in people's notes that they meet with you, they talk with you, you brainstorm. You have these campaigns across the country, sort of the evolution campaigns for people to think differently.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's where I'd love to see that 15 or 20 years later, to your question of what's on your mark, it won't really be that there's another 150 papers or 200 papers. It's really that you changed the paradigm, or you made a difference for your field in a way that people hadn't before. And I think you brought EBM to orthopedics.
Well, I would say, so obviously, how can I say anything but a huge thank you? That's very kind of you to say that. And I always look backward and say, I'm only here because of, the pure, in many ways, pure circumstance that I happen to be, family immigrated to Hamilton, went to McMaster, got to know some people, wanted to be back at McMaster, had the great fortune of meeting some amazing people. One of them,
Gordon Guy. Yeah,
right?
I know.
Right? And so him and I would just say that everything that I am and is through his opening the door for me, and then so many others. We have such an amazing team of people, and I get the privilege to work with great people. And the trainees reverse mentor me all the time. So I'm with so many people that I just learn from them all the time. I just sponge it up. So I feel like a student in many ways.
Yeah.
But the thing I think that you're getting to, which I have struggled with a good part of 10 years, has been the differentiation between what it means to be a successful individual or someone who has significance. And I always looked at, and this is how I interpret it, success was very egocentric and about you, and you kind of say, okay, I need this. If I get this, these things will happen to me, and that is a good thing or a bad thing. But generally, it's a good thing if hopefully good things happen. You get to a point where you get some of that stuff. You look backward and you say, okay, but this isn't probably what this is about. It's about trying to leave a footprint, some sort of footprint, right? Some sort of footprint on others, and that gets to what is that? I look at it as significant. So I think what you're doing is having the absolute, in my mind, the maturation of thought that I still try to do. I'm still trying to mature into it. Is how do you find ways to help others to be exceptional? And a lot of times, what I've learned is what is exceptional for someone's life is not what I think it should be. It's what I think they need to have for themselves. In helping people find that pathway. So I've actually helped, I think, as many people leave orthopedics and find their pathway than as many as I think I've helped come into orthopedics. Sure. And actually, many of them I just want them to be happy and I want them to be successful.
Right.
So I think of it that way. and I'm learning away. We could talk about this. I'm sure we could talk about many, many things,
Right.
but that's one big one for me.
It's a great point, though. I remember hearing a talk recently where, mentorship's not such an easy thing, and oftentimes we think it's about giving them what we think they need, as opposed to helping them find what they want, right? And they're not the same thing.
So a mentor, I define a mentor. I always ask students, like here I am, working with you, but you should be really testing me. Like you should find out what I'm about, right?
Yeah.
You want to be testing me, and they all look at me like, what do you mean? A mentor should be someone who sees, in my mind, a vision for you that is greater than the one you see for yourself. And they have to help you achieve that. But they have to help you achieve the one for you, right? And not the one for them,
Sure.
right? And
Sure.
we've seen both sides of that storyline.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to pause here, and I want to take a moment just to thank Dr. Bedi for being here. We're going to continue this discussion over dinner. We're going to continue talking, and we're going to have lots and lots of more. And I'm going to have to make sure we get you back.
Oh, I love it.
Because we can talk all night.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for the
On this last little bit, I've been asking a lot of our guests what their daily routine is. Can you share your daily routine? How is it that you are able to do as much as you can do?
Sure. To the best I can, Mo. As you know, in our world, things definitely change a little day to day. But there's no question there's some monotony to it. I would say largely our worlds are centered around the clinic and the OR.
Yep.
And so you sort of know that come hell or high water, you're going to be there at 7:30 when a patient's asleep, and you're
Yep.
going to be there till the last patient's seen or the last case is done. So it kind of works around that for me. And so days start early. I think one of the growing challenges in my life, I can't imagine how you do it with all the hats you wear, but you sort of do all the other work around that work.
Yep.
So we start early, 5:30 in the morning. I'm usually up and about and ready to go. We'll have meetings, either fellow conferences or resident conferences for teaching.
Okay, I'm going to take a step back. So if you're already in the hospital and having meetings at 5:30, when are you physically getting up? And when are you, how are you, what is your, tell me about that hour before you show up. What happens?
I sure will. It probably explains why I physically look like I do on the podcast video, but it's often, a 4:30, wake up. And
okay.
Part of that is, I don't want to digress too much, but the team physician role can be demanding.
Sure.
And the hardest part about that role, but also the most rewarding, is the unpredictability of it.
Right.
So there can be free agents that are brought in, and you have to do physicals, and I often do them in the morning or after the OR, or you have injuries that happen and come in, and you need to go to training rooms to see those athletes. So I'll often be prepared that in the morning or in the evening is when I need to fit that work in.
Understood.
And then in an academic center like yours, you want to make sure that the education's at a premium. We hold all the faculty accountable that no case conference or resident conference or educational conference or morbidity or mortality is really useful if we ourselves are not going to be there to represent our cases and teach them. So we go to those and get going, and it does require a really understanding spouse. Kids are asleep by the time I'm in the car driving to the hospital, and many times they're asleep by the time I get home, which doesn't make me anything but failing grades as a father and a husband.
Okay, let me ask you this. So your alarm rings at what time?
Most days.
On one of your tougher days. I'm just curious what it is.
4:30, 4:45.
Okay, let's do 4:30, 4:45. And you get ready, and then are you grabbing just simple things? Are you are you eating anything before you get in? Are you grabbing something in the hospital? And when do you check? When you connect with the world, do you connect once you're in, or right up when you get in?
No, great question. It's in our chaotic life, we have a dog, and so I have a bit of a science to it that I figured out now, which is I'll run and let the dog out, and I'll hit the coffee machine, and I'll run upstairs and take a shower, and I'll get dressed up, and somewhere along the way there, I'll grab the phone, and I'm sure like you, I try not to check emails in the middle of the night. I don't keep the phone on silent, so I'm still available for the emergencies. But usually in the morning, I do a quick scroll through the emails to know which are emergents and urgents, and which are ones that I'm going to flag and address later in the day. Right. And then I'll think a little bit about my day, and if I know that it's OR cases and I have a little downtime between those cases, I'm going to get back to those emails and things.
Yes.
If it's clinic, I know I'm going to struggle a little more with that, but I'll try to get to it at the end of the day. So it's nothing more than glorified triage.
Yeah.
And then usually I'll sort of try to just make my way power through the day, and then take a breath at the end of the day to organize on all the things that I have to get done before the next day. if I was telling you, probably the thing that I always struggle the most with is with all the balls that are in the air, several fold less than what you have. I always feel like I'm trying to make sure that I get to the ones that don't immediately drop for tomorrow. And so it's feeling like you always have a deadline.
Yes.
And if it's a paper that hasn't been reviewed, or journal articles that you need to read, or talks that you have coming a week from now, I know that those I have a few more nights to get to.
Yes.
But the ones that I know you got to get to tomorrow, I'm always keeping a little bit of a mental list.
It's never ending, though.
Never
isn't it?
ending.
Never ending.
I don't know if you do this. It's maybe not the best technique, but one I've learned is I email myself a working list.
I
And
do
as
that.
I'm going through my day, I keep adding to that list, and I put things higher on it and lower on it, including simple things like packing for my trip, or making sure I make my kids' event tonight. That's really important.
Yeah, right.
And then at the end of the day, I just look and see how many of those I've hit. Usually it's less than 30%.
And it just gets triaged.
It just gets triaged.
But there is stuff that like it, right? That the stuff that you can give up, or it just doesn't happen, and you think, I probably didn't need to rush on that one, and I prioritized the wrong stuff. And my biggest thing, the biggest larger problem for me has been realizing that in many ways in the past I've prioritized the wrong stuff, and then trying to reprioritize. And I'm going right back to where we started, that 20%. I write down that 20% and say, this is the stuff that really matters, and how do I figure out and how do I make it happen? Now, it's all about creating your schedule that allows you to have that. You're slugging through a full OR day. There's not a lot of flexibility in that day, so it's a matter of how you manage the rest of the week, right?
But I think it's a really good point, and I need to take the advice, but actually listen to it. We all go through these moments. I've definitely had health issues that come up here and there, and you don't want the event of the you don't want the heart attack or the stroke or something as the brutal reminder that you focused on the 80% that seemingly was the absolute drop down, had to get it done. Just like I shared with you, we get to the OR come hell or high water.
Yeah, right.
I could certainly push myself to get to the gym the same way, but it's the easiest one to fall on the bottom of the list.
Well, I'll tell you, with 10 years ahead of you, you start realizing that when you start setting your goals to say, well, you know what, when I'm X, all this will be sorted out, and I'll start doing this tomorrow. I think you got to have the mindset as early as you possibly can about focus on the day, right? I mean, focus on today. Today takes care of tomorrow. Focus on tomorrow. Tomorrow takes care of the next day. And eventually that will get you to where you need to be. Yeah. And I think I got too caught up in, what's your 5-year plan and what's your 10-year plan. And those are wonderful, but those are long distances, especially in an economy that we're in right now where the attention span is what Instagram says 6 seconds.
Yeah.
Right? 6 seconds.
Yeah.
So 6 seconds is the plan. You have literally 5 seconds to make an impact on whatever you're doing. And if you can't tell a story that you want to tell about yourself, then you're not going to have that impact.
Yeah, great point. Great point.
That was awesome.
Hey,
good
thanks
to see
so
you.
much.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we'll chat. We'll keep going. Thanks again. And we'll have another guest soon.
Thanks for watching Orthopod. Stay tuned for more episodes.